The moment he kicked her, he thought he won. But when she struck back, his entire world came crashing down. The city was alive with movement, cars honking, pedestrians weaving through the streets, the scent of fresh coffee and exhaust mingling in the crisp afternoon air. Tara Johnson stepped out of a cafe, adjusting the strap of her leather bag over her shoulder. She was dressed simply: black jeans, a fitted leather jacket, dark sunglasses perched atop her head. To any passerby, she was just another woman in the crowd, blending in effortlessly. And that was exactly how she liked it. She had just finished an exhausting morning at the FBI headquarters, debriefing a major undercover operation. Now, all she wanted was to enjoy her coffee and take a quiet walk before heading home. But fate had other plans. Across the street, she noticed a commotion. A police officer, a tall, broad-shouldered white man in his late 40s, was yelling at a homeless man, his voice sharp and condescending. The old man trembled as he fumbled for something in his tattered coat, but the officer only grew more aggressive. Tara narrowed her eyes. "Get your hands out of your pockets," the officer barked, shoving the man against the wall. People walked by, some glancing in their direction, but no one stopped. No one interfered. Tara clenched her jaw. She had seen this too many times before. The unchecked authority, the abuse of power, the blatant disregard for human dignity. She wasn't here to pick a fight, but something in her told her to stay, to watch. Then the officer turned, and their eyes met. For a brief second, Tara saw something flicker in his gaze: contempt, irritation, an unspoken challenge. She didn't react, didn't flinch, just kept watching. And somehow, that made him angrier. "The hell you looking at?" he sneered, taking a step toward her. Tara tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. She had no intention of engaging with him. At least, not yet. But something about her silence seemed to get under his skin. "I asked you a question, lady," he snapped. Tara exhaled slowly. She could feel the weight of the moment shifting, tension thick in the air. A younger officer standing nearby shuffled uncomfortably, clearly sensing the unnecessary hostility, but he said nothing. Tara didn't have to respond. She had spent years learning how to pick her battles. But before she could turn away, the officer made a mistake, one that would cost him everything. A sudden force slammed into her lower back. Pain shot up her spine as she stumbled forward, barely catching herself. The bastard had kicked her. For a second, everything around her blurred. The distant hum of traffic, the muted murmurs of passers-by, the way the sun cast long shadows on the pavement. Then, everything snapped back into focus. Tara turned, slowly, deliberately. The officer smirked, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Didn't hear me the first time?" he mocked. "I said—" He never finished that sentence, because in the next breath, Tara's fist connected with his face. The impact was instant. A sharp crack echoed through the street as Tara's fist met his jaw, sending his head snapping to the side. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Pedestrians who had been content to ignore the situation moments ago now stopped in their tracks, eyes wide with shock. Even the younger officer standing nearby took an instinctive step back, his hand hovering near his holster. The cop staggered, catching himself against the hood of a parked car. His smug expression had vanished, replaced by sheer disbelief. His fingers brushed his face, feeling the warmth of his own blood where her knuckles had split the skin. His eyes, now burning with rage, locked onto Tara, with an intensity that could have set fire to the street. "You—" he spat, straightening up, fists clenching. "You just assaulted a police officer." Tara remained still, her face unreadable. No fear, No regret, just a steady, almost unnervingly calm presence. She adjusted her jacket slightly, tilting her head. "You assaulted me first," she said evenly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. The way she said it, not as an accusation, but as a fact, only made his anger boil hotter. "You think you can get away with this?" he growled. "You're under arrest." He lunged, reaching for her wrist, but Tara moved first. In a blur, she twisted out of his grip, sidestepped, and planted a sharp elbow into his ribs. He let out a strangled grunt, doubling over slightly. The younger officer, now clearly panicking, reached for his radio. "We need backup at—" "Stand down," Tara ordered sharply. The command was so firm, so authoritative, that for a split second, the young cop hesitated, his fingers hovering over the radio. Something about her tone, the sheer confidence in her stance, made him second-guess everything. But the older cop wasn't second-guessing anything. He was seeing red. "You bitch!" he roared, drawing his baton. "I'll—" Tara's patience snapped. In a single motion, she stepped in, grabbed his wrist mid-swing, and yanked him off balance. He stumbled, and before he could recover, she drove a knee into his gut, knocking the wind out of him. He crumpled to one knee, gasping. The crowd around them had grown now. People were recording. Someone had already called 911. The tension in the air was suffocating. Tara exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "You should have walked away." But the man on the ground wasn't hearing her. His pride had been shattered in front of too many witnesses. His face twisted with fury and humiliation. He reached for his gun. And in that moment, Tara knew he had just destroyed his own life. Before he could even unholster it, Tara moved. Faster than the human eye could track, she stepped in, gripped his arm, and in one fluid motion, twisted it behind his back and forced him down onto the pavement. His own weight worked against him, sending him crashing onto the hard concrete, his cheek pressing against the unforgiving surface. A pained cry tore from his throat as Tara kept his arm pinned with expert precision, applying just enough pressure to keep him immobilized. "You like throwing your weight around?" Tara said, her voice quiet but sharp. "How does it feel now?" He thrashed, but he wasn't going anywhere. Then, finally, she made her move. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a sleek black leather badge holder and flipped it open. The golden emblem of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed under the city lights. The young officer paled instantly. The cop, pinned beneath her, went completely still. Tara leaned in slightly, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You just assaulted a federal agent." Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. Then, from the crowd, a voice whispered in awe. "She's FBI?" The words spread like wildfire. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The man beneath her, who had been so confident, so untouchable just moments ago, was now frozen in sheer, gut-wrenching terror. For the first time, he realized, he wasn't the one in control. Not anymore. The weight of the moment crashed down like a tidal wave. The once arrogant cop, now pinned beneath Tara, was breathing hard, his face pressed against the cold pavement. His mind raced, trying to process the reality that had just shattered his world. He had assaulted an FBI agent. The younger officer stood frozen, eyes flicking between Tara's badge and his superior, uncertainty written all over his face. The tension in the air was so thick, it was suffocating. Tara remained motionless for a second longer, letting the reality of the situation sink in, letting him feel every ounce of the power he had just lost. Then, with calculated precision, she released his arm, standing to her full height. He gasped for air, coughing, his face red with humiliation. "Get up," she ordered. For the first time since this had started, he hesitated. There was no trace of the smug confidence he'd had earlier. No threats, no bravado. He was exposed, vulnerable, his entire authority crumbling beneath him. Slowly, he pushed himself up, his hands shaking slightly as he got to his feet. He looked around, suddenly realizing just how many people were watching. The crowd had grown larger, phones held high, recording every second. There was no way out of this, no way to spin this in his favor. "Officer," Tara said, her voice calm but firm. "State your name and badge number." He swallowed hard. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Tara raised an eyebrow. "Did you forget it? Or are you just realizing how much trouble you're in?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. People who had initially looked on in passive curiosity now watched with growing intensity, their expressions shifting. Some with amusement, some with satisfaction, others with quiet, simmering anger. "You think this changes anything?" He finally spat, his voice lower now, lacking the same bite it had before. "You're just another—" He stopped himself. Too late. Tara tilted her head slightly, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "Go on," she encouraged, voice almost playful. "Say it." He clenched his jaw, the veins in his neck straining. He had spent years getting away with his behavior. He had pushed people around, intimidated them into silence. But this was different. This time, he had picked the wrong person. "You don't get it, do you?" Tara continued, taking a slow step forward. "This isn't just about me. It's about the dozens of people you've done this to before me. The ones who didn't have a badge to protect them. The ones who had to take it, keep their heads down, walk away humiliated." He exhaled sharply through his nose, refusing to meet her gaze. "You've been doing this for years, haven't you?" She pressed, her voice quieter now, but every bit as sharp. "Kicking people when they're down, throwing your weight around, believing you're untouchable." She let the words hang in the air. He shifted uncomfortably, his fingers twitching at his sides. Then, she took another step closer, voice dropping lower. "But today, you picked the wrong one." For the first time, true fear flashed in his eyes. The younger officer suddenly stepped forward, breaking his silence. "Ma'am, He hesitated. "I didn't know." Tara turned her gaze to him. "Didn't know what?" He faltered, looking at his superior, then at the badge still glinting in Tara's hand. His face was tight with conflict. He was young, probably not long on the force. Maybe he hadn't been part of the problem for as long as the man beside him had. But he had stood by. He had watched. Tara didn't break eye contact. "What are you going to do?" A beat of silence. The weight of the question settled over him. Then, reluctantly, he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reynolds," he said, voice thick with tension. "I need a supervisor at my location. Possible excessive force incident involving Officer Carter." The older cop, Carter, whipped his head toward him, eyes blazing. "Reynolds, don't—" But the damage was done. Tara exhaled, the first hint of satisfaction flickering in her eyes. It was a small step, but it was something. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Carter's shoulders tensed. He turned back to Tara, his jaw tight, his breathing heavy. "You think this is over?" he growled. "You think this will stick?" Tara didn't flinch. "Oh, it'll stick," she said, "because this time there's evidence. There are witnesses. There's a story that people are going to hear." She took one last step toward him, voice quiet, lethal. "And this time, you're the one who's going to have to answer for it." The color drained from his face. The crowd murmured again, a mix of excitement and justice finally being served. As the first squad car pulled up, Tara stood tall, her stance unwavering. She had spent years watching men like Carter get away with it. But not today. Not anymore. The sirens wailed as the first squad car screeched to a halt, the red and blue lights flashing against the pavement. The tension in the air was suffocating, every breath thick with the weight of what had just happened. Officer Carter stood rigid, his fists clenched at his sides, his chest rising and falling in short, shallow breaths. The arrogance that had once dripped from his every move was gone, replaced by something colder, something closer to fear. The door to the squad car swung open, and out stepped a tall, commanding figure in a crisp uniform. Captain Rodriguez. His face was unreadable, but the sharpness in his gaze as he scanned the scene told Tara everything she needed to know. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice cut through the noise like a blade. Carter straightened, trying to regain composure. "Sir, this woman assaulted an officer." "Cut the bullshit." Rodriguez's voice was sharp. He turned to Tara. "Agent Johnson." Carter's head snapped toward his captain so fast, it was a wonder he didn't strain his neck. His face twisted with confusion, and then horror. Rodriguez already knew her. Tara met the captain's gaze with steady eyes, flipping open her badge once more. "This officer assaulted me first, kicked me, in front of multiple witnesses. I defended myself." Rodriguez didn't react right away. He exhaled, slowly, then turned toward the younger officer. "Reynolds, talk." Reynolds swallowed hard, shifting nervously. He looked at Carter, who was glaring at him with the kind of silent warning that had probably kept younger officers in line for years. But this time, something had shifted. Reynolds took a breath. "She's telling the truth, sir." A heavy silence followed. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to Carter, then to the bystanders, who were still recording. He knew. This wasn't something that could be swept under the rug. Not with all these witnesses. Not with a federal agent involved. Carter's face twisted with desperation. "Sir, she—" Rodriguez held up a hand. "Enough." The command was final. Tara watched as Carter deflated, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own downfall. "You're done," Rodriguez said coldly. "Turn in your weapon and your badge." Carter's breath hitched. "You can't be serious." Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous tone. "We are in a city filled with cameras. You kicked a woman in broad daylight, a federal agent no less. You really think you can talk your way out of this?" Carter opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted to Tara, filled with the last remnants of his misplaced superiority. She tilted her head slightly. "Still think I'm just another civilian?" His jaw clenched. Then, under the weight of a dozen stares, he reached for his badge with trembling fingers. The polished metal reflected the flashing red and blue lights as he unpinned it from his chest. Slowly, reluctantly, he handed it over to Rodriguez. His gun followed. Tara watched him, expression unreadable. No satisfaction, no smugness, just the quiet certainty that justice had finally caught up with him. Carter turned away, his hands balled into fists, his face burning with humiliation. And then, just as he was about to be led away, Tara spoke one last time. "Next time you think about kicking someone," she said, her voice soft but razor sharp, "make sure they're not in the FBI." Carter flinched, and just like that, it was over. The weight of the moment settled over the street like a thick fog. Carter stood motionless, his badge and gun no longer in his possession, his authority stripped away in front of a growing crowd. The people who had once ignored the confrontation were now watching intently, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Rodriguez turned to Reynolds, his voice clipped. Escort him to the station. I'll handle the paperwork. Reynolds hesitated for only a second before nodding. Yes, sir. He moved forward, placing a firm hand on Carter's arm. The former officer barely resisted, his movements sluggish, as if his mind was still struggling to process the downfall that had unraveled in mere minutes. As he was led away, a murmur spread through the crowd. A few people clapped. Others shook their heads, muttering about how long it had taken for someone like him to finally face consequences. Phones were still recording, capturing every second. This wasn't just an incident anymore. It was a story, one that would be told, shared, and remembered. Tara remained still, her breathing steady. She had been in situations like this before, had seen corrupt men crumble when they realized the world wasn't going to bend to their will anymore. But this time, it felt different, because this wasn't just about her. An older black woman stepped forward, her face lined with years of experiences Tara could only guess at. She met Tara's gaze and nodded once, a quiet gesture of respect. "Thank you," she murmured. Tara didn't answer right away. Instead, she exhaled slowly, nodding back. She didn't need thanks. She just needed people to stop having to fight battles like this in the first place. With one last glance at Carter being shoved into the back of a squad car, Tara adjusted her jacket, turned on her heel, and walked away. She had more important battles to fight. As Tara disappeared into the city streets, the echoes of the moment lingered. The bystanders who had once stayed silent were now talking, some shaking their heads, others nodding in approval. The videos would spread. The story would be told. In the back of the squad car, Carter sat motionless, staring out at the world that had just turned against him. His hands clenched into fists, but this time, there was no power behind them. No authority to abuse, no badge to hide behind. Only the cold, hard reality of what he had done. And the knowledge that this time, finally, he was the one being held accountable. Tara didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had made her point. Some people learn their lessons the hard way. Others never learn at all. But the world was changing. Moments like these, they were proof. Now the question is, how many more will it take? What do you think? Have you ever witnessed something like this before? Do you think justice was truly served? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you don't want to miss more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know when the next shocking moment will unfold.